The great hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 47 different species gathered for the most important vote in galactic history. Dr. Lisa Grant sat in the human delegation section, her hands folded tightly in her lap as she watched the alien faces around her. The Thurians glowed with their crystalline bodies catching the chamber lights, while the insectoid klaxons clicked their mandibles in what she had learned was their version of worried discussion. Even the usually calm Zephyrians seemed agitated, their blue skin shifting to darker shades that meant deep concern. The emergency session had been called after the terrible disaster on Zephyria Prime 3 weeks ago. Lisa still remembered the horrific reports that came through the communication networks. The replicator systems that fed the entire planet had been infected with a computer virus. Instead of creating the nutritious food compounds that the Zephyrians needed to survive, the machines had started producing toxic chemicals. Within hours, millions of beings were sick. Within days, entire cities were empty. The investigation team had worked around the clock to find the source of the virus. They discovered that a single corrupted data packet had somehow entered the replicator network during a routine software update. The virus had spread faster than anyone could stop it, turning the very machines that sustained life into instruments of death. The Zephyrian homeworld, once home to 12 billion beings, now held fewer than 1 million survivors. Council Speaker Vorthak, a tall being with 4 arms and silver skin, stood at the center podium. His voice carried through the chamber without the need for amplification. "We have heard all the evidence," he said. His words translated into dozens of languages through the neural implants each delegate wore. "The replicator technology that has fed our civilizations for 3 centuries has proven too dangerous to continue using. A single virus, a single mistake can kill entire worlds." Lisa felt her stomach tighten as she listened. She knew what was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that all the private discussions and leaked reports had not. The other human delegates beside her, Ambassador Paul Martinez and Trade Representative Susan Clark, looked just as worried. As she felt, the Thurian delegate rose first to speak. His crystalline form caught the light as he turned to address the assembly. "My people can absorb energy directly from stellar radiation," he said. "We do not depend on replicators for survival. But we have seen what happened to our Zephyrian friends. We cannot allow this technology to exist anywhere in the galaxy. The risk is too great." One by one, the other species voiced their agreement. The klaxons could produce their own nutrition through specialized glands in their bodies. The Moravians survived by eating simple mineral compounds that they could mine from any rocky planet. The Centauri collective shared nutrients through their hive-mind connection. Every species had some natural way to feed themselves that did not require the complex molecular assembly technology of replicators. Every species. Except humanity. When Lisa's turn came to speak, she stood slowly and looked around the chamber. These beings had been her colleagues and friends for years. She had worked with many of them on scientific projects and trade agreements. But now she had to try to convince them not to doom her entire species to starvation. "I understand your fears," she began, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "What happened on Zephyria Prime was a tragedy beyond measure. But humanity is different from your species. We cannot absorb stellar energy like the Thurians. We cannot produce our own nutrition like the klaxons. We need complex organic compounds to survive. And replicators are the only way we can get proper nutrition on our colonies in deep space." She gestured to a holographic display that showed the locations of human settlements throughout the galaxy. "We have colonies on 43 worlds. Most of these places cannot grow earth plants. The soil is wrong, the atmosphere is different, or there is no soil at all. Our people depend on replicators to convert local materials into the foods they need to live." The Moravian delegate, a being that looked like a living rock formation, spoke next. "But surely your species can adapt. You could return to your homeworld until safer technology is developed." Lisa shook her head. "Many of our colonies are performing vital work. The mining station at Kepler 442 is extracting the rare minerals. needed for the new defensive shields protecting Earth. The research station at Volf 359 is studying gravitational anomalies that could threaten shipping lanes throughout this sector. If we abandon these positions, it will harm not just humanity, but all the member species. Ambassador Martinez stood to support her argument. We could implement better security protocols, he suggested. Multiple isolation layers, quantum encryption, manual override systems. We could make the replicators safer. But the fear in the chamber was too strong. Speaker Vorthak called for the vote, and Lisa watched as species after species cast their decisions on the voting displays in front of them. The Thurians voted to ban. The Klaxons voted to ban. The Moravians, the Centauri, the Aldebarians, all voted to ban replicator technology throughout the galaxy. When the final tally appeared on the main display, it showed 46 votes to ban and only 1 vote against. Humanity stood alone. The motion passes, Speaker Vorthak announced. Effective immediately, all replicator technology is banned from use on any world or station within Galactic Council space. All existing replicator units must be shut down within 72 hours and dismantled within 1 standard month. Lisa sat down heavily, feeling the weight of the decision settle on her shoulders. Around the chamber, delegates were already beginning to file out, their duty done. But for humanity, the real crisis was just beginning. As she gathered her papers and prepared to leave, the Thurian delegate approached her. His crystalline face was hard to read, but his voice carried what sounded like genuine sympathy. I am sorry, Dr. Grant, he said, but the risk was too great. Perhaps your species will find another way. Lisa nodded politely, but inside she was already thinking about the emergency messages she would need to send. Every human colony and station would need to be warned. Emergency food supplies would need to be calculated and distributed. And somehow, they would need to find a way to survive without the technology that had sustained them among the stars. She walked out of the chamber knowing that millions of human lives now hung in the balance, and time was running out to save them. Dr. Amy Rodriguez stood at the viewport of the research vessel Horizon's Edge and stared out at the strange world below. The planet Kepler 442b stretched out beneath them like something from a fever dream, its surface covered in crystalline formations that caught and reflected the light from the system's red dwarf star. Weird plants with metallic leaves grew in scattered patches across the mineral-rich soil, while swarms of 6-legged creatures moved through the air like living jewels. 3 days had passed since the emergency message from Earth arrived. The Galactic Council had banned all replicator technology, and the 37 humans aboard the mining station were now facing a slow death by starvation. Their emergency food supplies would last maybe 2 months if they rationed carefully. The nearest supply ship from Earth would take 6 months to reach them. Commander Jake Phillips had called for volunteers to study the local ecosystem, hoping against hope that something on this alien world might be safe for human consumption. Amy had been the first to step forward. As a xenobiologist who specialized in extremophile organisms, she was the closest thing they had to an expert on alien life forms. The other crew members thought she was crazy. Chief Engineer Kate Morrison had told her flat out that she was planning to commit suicide by alien poisoning. Even Dr. Frank Morrison, the ship's medical officer, had warned her that the biochemistry of this world was so different from Earth that eating anything here would likely kill her within hours. But Amy had spent her career studying life in the most impossible places. She had found bacteria living in boiling acid springs in Yellowstone. She had discovered complex organisms thriving in the radioactive ruins of Chernobyl. She had even identified new species in the crushing depths of Earth's deepest ocean trenches. If life could exist in those places, then maybe the strange creatures of this world might be more similar to Earth life than anyone expected. She suited up and took the shuttle down to the surface, carrying with her a collection of portable analysis equipment that could break down biological compounds and identify their basic components. The atmosphere was breathable for humans, which was one of the reasons the mining operation had been established here, but the ecosystem was unlike anything she had ever encountered. The first creatures she studied were small flying things that looked like a cross between butterflies and beetles. They had 6 legs, iridescent shells that shimmered in the red sunlight, and wings that seemed to be made of some kind of living metal. When she caught one in a specimen jar and ran it through her analyzer, the results made her heart race. The creature's body was made up of proteins that were remarkably similar to those found in earth insects. The amino acid chains were slightly different, but they followed the same basic patterns that human digestive systems could process. Even more surprising, the protein content was much higher than anything found in earth insects. A single one of these flying creatures contained as much usable protein as a whole handful of earth crickets. She spent the next several hours collecting different species and running analysis after analysis. The results were consistently surprising. The 6-legged flyers weren't the only edible creatures on the planet. She found small ground-dwelling animals that looked like metallic mice but contained complete protein profiles. There were even larger creatures about the size of earth chickens that seemed to be made of living crystal but had organic interiors rich in essential fatty acids. The plants were even more interesting. What looked like weeds growing between the crystal formations turned out to be incredibly rich in vitamins and minerals. One species that resembled metallic dandelions contained more vitamin C than earth oranges. Another plant with silver leaves had roots that were packed with complex carbohydrates that could provide sustainable energy for human metabolism. When Amy returned to the ship with her initial samples, the crew gathered around her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright skepticism. She had prepared small portions of cooked insect meat and steamed plant matter for testing. The smell was actually not bad, reminding her of roasted nuts and steamed vegetables. Petty Officer Ryan Tucker was the first volunteer to try the insect protein. He took a small bite of the cooked flying creature and chewed thoughtfully. His face went through several expressions before he swallowed and looked up at Amy with surprise. "It tastes like lobster," he said. "Weird lobster, but definitely something." "Like seafood?" Engineer Kate Morrison tried the plant samples next. She had been the most vocal opponent of the whole idea, but hunger was starting to make everyone more willing to take risks. The metallic dandelion greens made her wrinkle her nose at first, but after a few bites she admitted they were actually quite pleasant. "They taste like spinach with a hint of something sweet," she reported. Dr. Frank Morrison monitored the volunteers for the next 24 hours, checking their vital signs and running blood tests to make sure the alien foods weren't causing any harmful reactions. To everyone's amazement, not only were the volunteers fine, they were actually showing improved nutritional markers. The alien foods were providing micronutrients and compounds that their standard emergency rations lacked. Over the following weeks, Amy expanded her research across the planet's diverse ecosystem. She discovered that the creatures living near the thermal vents contained different nutrients than those in the cooler crystalline fields. The plants that grew in the shadow of the larger mineral formations had different vitamin profiles than those that grew in direct sunlight. She began mapping out a complex ecosystem of potential food sources. The breakthrough came when she realized that the planet's life forms had evolved to process the high levels of exotic minerals in the soil. These same minerals, which would be toxic to most Earth life, had been incorporated into the alien biochemistry in ways that actually made them more nutritious for human consumption. The creatures weren't just safe to eat. They were actually better food than anything Earth had to offer. She set up a field laboratory near the mining station and began the careful work of documenting everything she learned. Each species was cataloged with detailed nutritional profiles, preparation methods, and safety notes. She discovered which parts of each creature were edible and which should be avoided. She learned which plants could be eaten raw and which needed to be cooked to break down potentially harmful compounds. The other crew members began to see Amy in a new light. What had started as a desperate experiment was turning into a genuine solution to their crisis. The woman who had been willing to risk her life eating alien bugs was now the person who might save them all from starvation. as she worked late into the Kepler 442b night. Surrounded by samples and data, Amy couldn't help but smile. She had always believed that life found a way to thrive even in the most unlikely places. Now she was proving that human ingenuity could find a way to thrive alongside it. Bobby Chun stood in the makeshift kitchen he had set up in one of the Horizon's Edge storage bays, staring at the collection of alien ingredients that Amy had gathered for him. The six-legged flying creatures sat in clear containers, their metallic shells catching the artificial light. Strange plants with silver leaves were arranged on preparation tables, while bowls of what looked like crystalline seeds and metallic berries completed the bizarre pantry. Before joining the space mining operation, Bobby had been the head chef. At 3 different restaurants back on Earth, he had trained in molecular gastronomy, learning to transform simple ingredients into extraordinary culinary experiences, using techniques that most people thought were more like science than cooking. He had won awards for creating flavors that no one had ever tasted before and textures that seemed impossible, but this was different. This wasn't about impressing food critics or creating Instagram-worthy presentations. This was about keeping 37 people alive using ingredients that no human had ever cooked before. The responsibility felt heavier than any kitchen pressure he had ever experienced. Amy had provided him with detailed notes about the nutritional content and basic safety information for each ingredient, but she was a scientist, not a cooker. Preparation methods were limited to boil until soft or roast until cooked through. It was up to Bobby to figure out how to make these alien foods not just edible, but actually appetizing enough that people would choose to eat them instead of hoarding their remaining emergency rations. He started with the flying creatures, which Amy had determined were the safest and most nutritious option. Using techniques he had learned for preparing Earth insects, he carefully removed the wings and harder shell parts, keeping only the meaty sections. The texture was somewhere between shrimp and chicken, with a slightly firmer bite than either. His first experiment involved treating them like prawns. He created a simple marinade using the ship's limited supply of salt and some herbs from the hydroponics bay. After letting the meat soak for an hour, he pan-fried them in a small amount of cooking oil. The smell that filled the storage bay was surprisingly pleasant, like seafood cooking with a hint of something nutty. The real challenge came with seasoning. The meat had a mild flavor that was actually quite pleasant on its own, but Bobby knew that familiar tastes would be crucial for crew acceptance. He experimented with different combinations of the limited spices available on the ship, finding that a mixture of garlic powder, black pepper, and a small amount of soy sauce created something that reminded him of Chinese salt and pepper prawns. The metallic plants presented a different challenge. Amy's notes indicated that they were rich in vitamins and minerals, but when Bobby tried cooking them using traditional methods, they turned into an unappetizing gray mush. He needed to find a way to preserve their structure while making them palatable. Drawing on his experience with molecular gastronomy, Bobby began experimenting with different cooking techniques. He discovered that quick blanching in boiling water followed by an ice bath preserved the plant's unusual texture while removing a slight metallic aftertaste. When prepared this way, the silver leaves had a crisp texture similar to water chestnuts. With a flavor that reminded him of asparagus, the crystalline seeds proved to be another breakthrough. When ground into powder, they created a flour substitute that could be mixed with water to form a dough. Bobby's first attempts at bread were disasters, producing dense, flavorless bricks that even he couldn't bring himself to eat. But when he remembered to add some of the plant-based sugars that Amy had identified, the results improved dramatically. His breakthrough moment came when he realized he was thinking too much like an Earth chef. These weren't Earth ingredients that he needed to force into familiar patterns. They were completely new foods with their own unique properties that he needed to learn to work with rather than against. The flying creatures, he discovered, released their own natural juices when cooked slowly at low temperatures. These juices had a rich, savory flavor that made an excellent base for soups and sauces. The metallic plants, when fermented using beneficial bacteria from the ship's hydroponic system, developed complex umami flavors that reminded him of mushroom. Bobby began creating combination dishes that played to the strengths of each ingredient. He made a protein-rich pasta, using flour ground from the crystalline seeds and pieces of the flying creatures cooked in their own juices. He created a refreshing salad using the blanched silver leaves topped with a dressing made from fermented plant juices and a small amount of the ship's remaining vinegar. The most challenging part was presentation. Bobby knew that people eat with their eyes first, and the alien ingredients looked, well, alien. He needed to make his dishes look as familiar and appetizing as possible. He spent hours working on plating techniques that emphasized familiar colors and textures while hiding the more unusual aspects of the ingredients. His first formal meal service was scheduled for the entire crew. Bobby had prepared a 3-course menu designed to gradually introduce people to the new flavors. He started with a simple soup made from fermented plant broth with small pieces of the ground-dwelling creatures that tasted similar to chicken. The main course was his signature pasta with flying creature meat and a sauce made from their natural juices. For dessert, he had created a sweet pudding using the natural sugars from the root vegetables and a custard base made from powdered seeds. Communications Officer Nancy White was the first to try the soup. She took a cautious sip, her face showing surprise at the familiar, comforting flavor. "This actually tastes like chicken soup," she said, taking a larger spoonful. "I can't believe this is made from alien ingredients." Engineer Kate Morrison, who had been one of the most skeptical about the whole project, tried the pasta next. She chewed thoughtfully, her expression gradually changing from suspicion to genuine appreciation. "The texture is perfect," she admitted. "And the flavor is actually really good. It reminds me of that seafood pasta place back in San Francisco." One by one, the crew members worked their way through the meal. There were still some hesitant faces and nervous comments, but Bobby could see that people were actually enjoying the food. More importantly, they were eating it. Second helpings were requested, and several crew members asked if they could get the recipes. The alien crew members who shared the station were fascinated by the human approach to food preparation. Vexhai, the Thurian science officer, had never seen anything like Bobby's cooking techniques. His species absorbed energy directly from stellar radiation, so the concept of transforming raw materials into complex flavors was completely foreign to him. "Your species treats nutrition as an art form," Vexhai observed, watching Bobby prepare the next day's meals. "You take these simple biological compounds and through application of heat, pressure, and chemical combinations you create entirely new sensory experiences." Bobby smiled as he continued his prep work. "Food isn't just about nutrition for humans," he explained. "It's about pleasure, comfort, community. A good meal can make people feel at home even when they're millions of miles from Earth." As word of Bobby's success spread through the station's communications, other human colonies began requesting his recipes and techniques. The crisis that had threatened to destroy the human presence in space was turning into an opportunity for culinary innovation that no one had imagined possible. The encrypted message from the Kepler mining station reached New Eden Agricultural Colony just as Dr. Carl Washington was conducting his weekly inspection of the failed crop fields, the hydroponic systems that had once produced fresh vegetables. For the colony's 800 residents lay dormant. Their replicator-based nutrient solutions banned along with all other molecular assembly technology. Carl read Bobby Chen's detailed cooking instructions and Amy Rodriguez's biological analyses with growing excitement. If humans could survive and even thrive eating alien life forms on Kepler 442b, then perhaps the seemingly worthless plant life growing wild around New Eden wasn't as useless as everyone had assumed. New Eden had been established on a world with an Earth-like atmosphere but soil that proved unsuitable for Earth crops. The colonists had always depended on hydroponic systems fed by replicators to produce their food. The native plant life had been studied briefly during the initial survey but dismissed as inedible. Now Carl wondered if those early assessments had been too hasty. He assembled a small team of volunteers including botanist Lisa Park and agricultural engineer David Kim. Together, they began a systematic study of the local ecosystem, using Amy's research methods as a guide. The planet's native plants were unlike anything in Earth's fossil record, but the basic principles of biological chemistry still applied. Their first breakthrough came with a sprawling vine that grew wild across the colony's outer perimeter. The plant produced small purple fruits that had been ignored because they tasted bitter and unpleasant when eaten raw. But when Carl remembered Bobby's notes about fermentation, he decided to experiment with different preparation methods. After 3 days of controlled fermentation, using bacteria cultures from the colony's medical supplies, the purple fruits transformed into something completely different. The bitter compounds had broken down into complex sugars, while new flavor compounds had developed that reminded Carl of earth grapes. When Lisa tasted the fermented fruit, her eyes widened in surprise. "This is actually sweet," she said, taking another bite. "It tastes like wine grapes mixed with something tropical." David Kim focused his attention on a weed-like plant that grew in dense patches throughout the settlement. The leaves were tough and fibrous, completely unlike any earth vegetable, but when he studied their cellular structure under a microscope, he discovered that they contained long chains of complex carbohydrates that could provide sustained energy for human metabolism. The key was preparation. Raw, the leaves were inedible, tough as leather and bitter as medicine. But David found that if he harvested only the youngest shoots and processed them through a series of cooking and fermentation steps, they became tender and developed a nutty flavor that reminded him of earth quinoa. Word of their successes spread to other human colonies through the emergency communication network that had been established after the replicator ban. Each settlement began studying their own local ecosystems with new eyes, looking for plants and animals that might have been overlooked during the initial colonization surveys. On the ice world of Titan's Reach, mining engineer Patricia Lee received Carl's research data just as her crew was facing their own food crisis. The frozen world had no visible plant life, but it was home to colonies of methane-breathing arthropods that lived in the subsurface ice caves where the mining operations were conducted. Patricia had always found the creatures creepy. They looked like giant ice blue spiders, each one about the size of a house cat, with 8 legs and mandibles that could cut through solid ice. The miners usually went out of their way to avoid them, but Amy's research had shown that arthropod-based life forms could be excellent sources of protein if prepared correctly. Patricia's first attempts at cooking the ice spiders were disasters. The meat was tough and had a chemical taste that made everyone who tried it sick. But she persisted, experimenting with different cooking methods and preparation techniques. She discovered that the creatures needed to be cleaned very carefully, removing certain organs that contained toxic compounds that helped them process methane. The breakthrough came when she realized that the creatures' natural habitat provided the key to cooking them properly. The ice spiders lived in an environment of extreme cold and high pressure. When Patricia replicated these conditions using pressure cooking techniques at sub-zero temperatures, the meat became tender and developed a flavor similar to earth crab. Her preservation methods proved even more important than her cooking techniques. By using the natural freezing conditions of Titan's Reach, Patricia could preserve large quantities of prepared spider meat for months. For the first time since the replicator ban, the mining colony had a reliable food supply that could last through the long periods between supply runs. As the months passed, a network of knowledge sharing developed between the human colonies. Recipes, preparation techniques, and preservation methods were transmitted through encrypted channels, creating an informal database of survival information. Each world's unique ecosystem contributed new foods and cooking methods to the growing collection. The agricultural station at Proxima Centauri discovered that the silicon-based crystals growing on their world could be processed into a mineral supplement that improved human bone density. The research outpost at Volf 359 found that local fungus-like organisms could be cultivated in their laboratory environments to produce vitamin-rich protein sources. Back on Earth, the Global Food Initiative established emergency research programs to study insects and plant species that had been overlooked by traditional agriculture. Urban farms began incorporating cricket protein production and dandelion cultivation into their operations. Scientists who had spent careers studying conventional crops suddenly found themselves experts in entomology and weed biology. The most surprising development came from the space stations and ships that had no access to planetary ecosystems at all. Engineer Marcus Wright, aboard the cargo vessel Star Trader, discovered that the algae growing in their water recycling systems could be harvested and processed into a complete nutritional supplement. What had always been considered a maintenance problem became a valuable food source. The Galactic Council watched these developments with growing amazement. Representatives from other species had expected the humans to request emergency food aid or abandon their more remote colonies. Instead, the humans seemed to be thriving under conditions that other species would have found impossible. Thurian Ambassador Vexhi filed regular reports describing the human approach to the crisis. His crystalline species had never encountered anything like the human ability to adapt and innovate under pressure. They do not simply accept the limitations of their environment, he wrote. They reshape their relationship with it until limitation becomes opportunity. The Klaxon trade delegation requested samples of human-prepared foods, curious about the complex flavors that humans could create from simple biological materials. Even species that had no need for solid nutrition began to appreciate human cooking as a form of artistic expression. Dr. Lisa Grant, who had witnessed the original vote to ban replicators, found herself fielding requests from alien governments who wanted to understand how humans had adapted so successfully. The crisis that had threatened to end human expansion into space was instead becoming the foundation for a new kind of interstellar presence, one based on understanding and working with natural ecosystems rather than replacing them with artificial technology. The supply ship Meridian approached the Kepler mining station 6 months after the replicator ban, its cargo holds filled with emergency food supplies that Captain Helen Torres expected would be desperately needed. The mining operation had been one of the most remote human settlements, completely dependent on replicator technology for survival. She had volunteered for this supply run expecting to find a colony on the brink of starvation. Instead, as the Meridian docked with the horizon's edge, Captain Torres found herself greeted by a crew that looked healthier and more energetic than she remembered from her last visit. Commander Jake Phillips met her at the airlock with a smile that seemed genuine rather than forced, and the familiar sounds and smells coming from the station suggested a thriving community rather than a desperate group of survivors. "Welcome back to Kepler Station," Jake said, leading her through corridors that seemed somehow more vibrant than she remembered. "I hope you brought an appetite because Bobby has prepared something special for dinner." Helen followed him through the station, noting details that seemed subtly different from her previous visits. The crew members she passed looked relaxed and well-fed. There was an energy in the air that reminded her of a successful research expedition, rather than an emergency survival situation. When they reached the main dining area, she stopped in amazement. The space had been transformed into something that looked more like a restaurant than a military mess hall. Tables were arranged in small groups rather than long institutional rows. Soft lighting had replaced the harsh overhead fluorescence, and the smells coming from what had once been a basic food preparation area made her mouth water in a way that emergency rations never had. Bobby Chin emerged from his kitchen wearing an apron that someone had decorated with hand-painted designs. His face lit up when he saw the supply ship captain. "Captain Torres," he called out. "Perfect timing. I just finished preparing the evening special." He presented her with a plate that looked like something from a high-end Earth restaurant. The proteins were arranged artfully alongside colorful vegetables with a sauce that had been drizzled in an elegant pattern. The aroma was complex and inviting, nothing like the functional food she had expected to find. "This is made entirely from local ingredients," Bobby explained as Helen took her first bite. The flavors were sophisticated and satisfying, with layers of taste that developed as she chewed. The protein had a texture similar to lobster, but with a richness that reminded her of the best Earth seafood. The vegetables provided contrast and freshness, while the sauce tied everything together with a savory depth that made her want more. This is incredible, Helen said, taking another bite. I can't believe this is made from alien life forms. Dr. Amy Rodriguez joined them at the table, carrying a tablet filled with research data. The nutritional profiles are actually superior to what we were getting from replicators, she explained. The local ecosystem provides micronutrients and compounds that artificial food synthesis never included. Our medical officer has documented improved health markers across the entire crew. Dr. Frank Morrison nodded in agreement. Lower inflammation, better digestive health, improved immune function. It's like the crew is eating a more complete diet than they ever had access to before. Some of the compounds in these alien organisms have properties we're still studying. As the evening progressed, Helen found herself part of something that felt more like a celebration than a survival story. Crew members shared stories about their favorite new dishes and debated the merits of different preparation techniques. The alien crew members had become integrated into the dining experience, with Vexai the Furian offering commentary on human food culture while the Klaxon engineer clicked appreciatively at particularly complex flavor combinations. Your species has turned necessity into art, Vexai observed. What began as a crisis has become an expression of creativity and community. The success at Kepler Station was not unique. Helen's next stops took her to colonies throughout the human sphere, and everywhere she found similar stories of adaptation and innovation. At New Eden, Dr. Carl Washington had established the first successful cultivation programs for native plant species, creating sustainable agriculture systems that required no off-world inputs. The ice mining colony at Titan's Reach had not only survived but had developed preservation techniques that allowed them to export surplus food to other colonies. Patricia Lee had become something of a celebrity among miners for her ice spider preparation methods, and her preserved protein products were now being traded throughout the sector. Even more remarkable was what had happened on Earth itself. The Global Food Initiative had documented massive changes in agricultural practices. As farmers began incorporating insects and previously ignored plants into their operations, urban farms in major cities were producing more protein per square meter than traditional livestock operations. School cafeterias were serving cricket flour pizza and dandelion salads to children who found the new foods more appealing than conventional options. The economic implications were staggering. Human colonies that had been expensive to maintain, because of their dependence on supply runs, were becoming self-sufficient. Some were even developing export markets for their unique food products. The Galactic Council's Economic Analysis Department reported that human trade volumes had actually increased since the replicator ban, 6 months after the crisis began. Dr. Lisa Grant found herself once again standing before the Galactic Council. But this time the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of fear and emergency, there was curiosity and admiration. Representatives from species throughout the galaxy had requested detailed reports on human adaptation methods. When we banned replicator technology, we expected your species to struggle, admitted Council Speaker Vorthok. Many of us believe that humans might need to abandon their remote colonies or request emergency aid. Instead, you have demonstrated capabilities that we did not know existed. The Thurian delegate, who had voted for the ban despite his friendship with humanity, stood to address the assembly. In our effort to prevent another tragedy like Zephyria Prime, we inadvertently created the conditions for human innovation to flourish. They have shown us that dependence on artificial technology may have been limiting our potential rather than expanding it. Lisa smiled as she looked around the chamber. The same aliens who had voted to ban human technology were now requesting access to human knowledge. Several species had begun studying their own planetary ecosystems with new interest, wondering what foods and resources they might have overlooked in their rush to develop replicator technology. The ban on replicators will remain in place, Speaker Vorthok continued, but we would like to propose a new initiative. The Council would like to establish a joint research program to study natural food systems throughout the galaxy. Humanity will lead this program, sharing your knowledge and techniques with any species that wishes to participate. The vote was unanimous this time, but for a very different reason. Where fear had once driven the Council to restrict human technology, admiration now drove them to embrace human innovation. The species that had nearly doomed humanity to starvation was now asking to learn from human success. Bobby Chun watched the Council proceedings from his kitchen aboard the Horizon's Edge, where he was preparing dinner for a delegation of Moravian scientists who had traveled halfway across the galaxy to study his cooking techniques. The beings that looked like living rocks had no need for organic nutrition, but they were fascinated by the human ability to transform simple ingredients into complex sensory experiences. Amy Rodriguez was leading field research teams on 17 different worlds, helping other species identify edible life forms in their own ecosystems. Her techniques for biological analysis and safety testing had become standard protocols throughout the galaxy. The crisis that had threatened to end human expansion into space had instead become the foundation for humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization. In learning to survive without artificial technology, humans had rediscovered their connection to the natural world and developed techniques that other species had never imagined. As Captain Torres prepared to depart Kepler Station with cargo holds now filled with exotic alien food products bound for Earth markets, she reflected on the remarkable transformation she had witnessed. The humans had not just survived their crisis, they had used it to become stronger and more innovative than ever before. The galaxy would never be the same.